What's going on, everyone? My name is Nicholas Merton here at Data Dash, and today is September 30th of 2019. Well, folks, I hope you are having a fantastic day wherever you are. And in today's update, we've got a few key things to discuss. It's going to be relatively quick, but at the same time, very substantive. We're going to be taking a look over cryptocurrency markets and getting a really good understanding, taking a look at the weekly and monthly timeframes to understand where we are in the cycle. And along with that, we'll be talking about the infamous repo market that the Fed has decided to inject $400 billion into and try to understand what is really going on behind the scenes. Why are they injecting this capital? Why is it so urgent? And last but not least, we have got a sponsored interview talking with Dan from Morpheus Network, one of the projects that we've talked to many times here on the channel. So I hope you guys will stick around for that. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. But let's go ahead and take a look at cryptocurrency markets. So over the last 24 hours since our last video, things are relatively uneventful. We don't have too much of a change in the sense of price action. But again, I want to spend some time as markets are pushing sideways to try to understand really what's going on here, right? So if we take a look here at our key three indicators here in CoinMarketCap, we can see overall valuations relatively flat. But the interesting thing is that we can start to see a little bit of a change in trend here for altcoins, right? If we take the bottom here around 67.9 billion to the peak here, right? We're starting to tick up a little bit here for altcoins. Nothing dramatic, again, nothing enough to confirm that we're in some kind of trend shift, but that you see this continued divergence between the overall market cap, basically Bitcoin in this case, and altcoins. And you start to see altcoins themselves starting to split off, taking any kind of gains we're seeing in the market. It's a really interesting trend shift. And we can see that materialized here in overall market dominance. Now, if we take a look here at the total market cap, we get a better view of this, the overall market valuation. Again, we've been very close here as we've corrected after this about $40 to $50 billion sell-off in market valuation back here last week. We're now pushing very close to a key support range here, which is $200 billion. Big even level. We've seen it in the past here. It's where price broke through when we went down to $100 billion. We had the 50% correction in the market. So as all of the trends right now, from the MACD cross to the squeeze momentum indicator to the stochastic RSI, all are signaling that we're in bearish territory right now. It's probably going to be that we're going to rest at this range. I think we've seen most of the sell-off. I think these indicators have showcased that. But it's really going to be a showcase of about a week or two, if not possibly 3 in October, where we hold down in this range and start to curve up. We make this this previous range of support again, right? And we also treated it as resistance back here. So I think this level holds a pretty significant sense of importance for markets to move higher, right? Now, the key thing here, again, to take into mind is where is that increase in valuation going to come? If we take a look at total 2, right, and this is when we're seeing the total valuations excluding Bitcoin, right? Take a look at the daily here, right? We've been holding. We're not setting new lows here. In fact, we're seeing a lot of major players starting to tick upward. Just this morning, for example, take a look at some of them. XRP, they just recently announced a new banking partnership, but not even talking about the fundamentals here, just to be fair. In the sense of market momentum, XRP taking up to new highs against Bitcoin here, or relative new highs in the short term. Take a look at ETH, right? Go ahead and get a good picture of ETH here. Almost back up to the previous highs here, or relative, when I'm talking about relative highs, guys, I'm talking about like in the short term time frame, right? Like we're setting higher lows and possibly getting very close here to higher highs, which is a good sign of a trend reversal. I'll keep on emphasizing that to the day I die, as I do with previous resistance becomes new support. By the way, just to mention it, I don't know if you guys are going to come. I'm about to fly out in a few hours to start heading out towards Malta to visit the Delta Summit, which I'm really excited about. It's been a year since the conference was hosted. That was the last time I was in Malta. But if you guys happen to be going there, let me know. That'd be awesome. I'd love to see you guys there. Don't hesitate to, introduce yourself. Just wanted to share it with you guys. And if there are any ladies out there, the reason I was bringing that up is if you whisper into my ear, previous resistance becomes new support, or, lower highs, higher highs and higher lows usually confirms a bullish trend. If you whisper any kind of stuff like that, my sayings into my ears, I'm probably going to fall for you and we can get married next week, okay? But I've got so many of my sayings, guys. Like it's so funny. I know I haven't done it yet. I want to get merch one day for the channel. And we need to get all those printed on shirts with like really cool designs or something. I don't know. If you guys have any ideas, leave it down in the comments down below. But understand, I might make it a reality and turn it into a shirt for the channel. But going towards the weekly time frames here and not goofing around anymore, the thing I look for here is, again, a consistency of a few weeks of green here when I take a look at the weekly chart. Again, when you take a look at these longer term time frames, you start to realize how easy it is to spot the longer term trends, right? So if you take a look back here, when we take a look at the overall price of Ethereum all the way back here, really towards August of 2015, right? There's some exchanges you could probably get a little bit more, but this is really where Ethereum got started, right? Notice how, in most cases, in order for one of these major uptrends to start, you usually have multiple weeks where the shade of the candle start to turn from red to green, right? And it doesn't always mean that you're going to miss out on the cycle if you wait around for a little while, right? You get some bump ups here, price holds after those leap ups, and then you eventually get the longer term cycle coming in on a multi-week period, right? And you can also see with our indicators, again, that the squeeze momentum indicator, right, again, is starting to reverse. You see the cross on the MACD. You see the stochastic RSI coming in. So the thing about this is that we want to look for a mix of our indicators. We want to see, again, not only those sharp corrections. We got the 90% correction here for Ethereum, but you also want to see that uptick in the weekly on a multi-week period, showcasing, hey, you know, for those of you who are trying to bottom pick, who are waiting for prices to come down here and here, there's buyers here, and we're buying right now. And that's the kind of thing that sparks market trends, that sparks a sense of FOMO, and really not so much that they're buying at irrational prices, but that it's like, you know what, I was planning to buy at half the price of where we are now, but you know what, I can't help it. I see the trends coming in, and that's when the waves start forming, right? And I think, you know, there's altcoins right now. A lot of projects like Ethereum are at ranges where I think they're at fair value. If not, they deserve to be valued higher because there's so many interesting applications in Ethereum. The blocks are full. That's just what I'm saying, but that's in the sense of altcoins. And there's a lot of interesting projects being built on top of Ethereum and other cryptocurrency and altcoin projects out there that I'm excited about. But the last thing I want to talk about here that I wanted to look at is BTC dominance. Right, we were talking about just when we were taking a look at coin market cap. Take a look at that weekly, guys. MACD crossed, right? MACD is officially crossed. Stochastic RSI looking extremely bearish here, and then also here for the squeeze momentum indicator. What I mean by bearish is that the trend's reversing. Bitcoin dominance does not look like it's going to be rising anytime soon. And once you break below this low here, guys, and you continue this trend of clearly lower lows and lower highs, I mean, if Bitcoin upticks, altcoins are going to come up just as strong. What we're so used to is that, you know, when Bitcoin goes up, altcoins don't come up as much. And when Bitcoin goes down, you know, altcoins come down just as hard. That was because we were in a trend where Bitcoin dominance was rising. But as we enter closer and closer to 20K, when we get close to revisiting the previous highs, know that in history, that is when altcoins really start to move. And quite frankly, if we take a look at the on the weekly chart here, take our drawings on here, this is what we're generally expecting here. We're expecting to come down to the support line. I'm looking at the logarithmic chart, so it's a little bit off, but we're expecting to come down to the support line here. So that's what I'm looking for. I'd love to know what you guys think down below in the comments. Next up, I want to spend some time to dive into this really interesting article that dives into the topic around the madness within the repo market. And this is written by someone who many of you might know in the crypto space. She has been a massive contributor to the cryptocurrency and blockchain space, and that is Caitlin Long. She is not only extremely experienced working in traditional financial markets, but has been one of the pioneers pushing forward blockchain and cryptocurrency adoption and legislation in the state of Wyoming. So I'm really interested to see what they do there, but that's a topic for another time. Caitlin Long is a really awesome person, and she did an awesome article talking about the repo market, whereas most journalists just kind of talk about it on a surface level and don't really talk about what might have actually happened that led the Fed to needing to inject $400 billion of short-term cash. Well, Caitlin actually gets to the surface and gets down to the infrastructure, the piping, and really tries to see what might be going wrong within the financial sector that led the financial system to running out of cash, right? So she kind of starts off and talking about what kind of happened in the repo market. We've discussed this on the channel. There was a spike in repo markets, and this really means one of two things, if not both, to some degree. It either means that some bank needed a lot of cash real quick, or that a lot of banks weren't willing to lend to other commercial banks. This is what the repo market is. It's short-term loans where I, for example, maybe I'm JP Morgan and you're Goldman Sachs. I give you $50 billion and you give me $50 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries, some high-tier asset that usually is a fixed income asset of some sort. And that's why the cost to borrow capital is usually quite small. It's about 1 or 2% annualized. So over a day or two, it's not going to cost you much. But the thing is that we saw a massive spike in the repo market, and so much to where it actually leads a very interesting question, right? She talks in this article about a lot of misconceptions people have, that U.S. Treasuries are risk-free, that they are the, maybe they're the safe haven of the world in the sense of assets. The question still remains is whether or not are they really risk-free? And then also, why is it that someone who had an asset that yields them 2%, right, on an annual basis, would go out and trade that given asset in the short term for paying an 8% yield for cash? That's a very, very big difference between what you're earning on your treasury, right? In this case, treasury is paying you 2%, but in this case, you're aiming to get cash and paying a margin of 8%, right? Doesn't make much sense. So, there must have been something that was going on behind the scenes here, and a lot of people believe that this is speaking to insolvency, right? And Caitlin even mentions she doesn't believe that the concern here is that the government is going to default on its treasuries. That's not her concern. It's not that there's so much a massive liquidity crunch in the system, but it has to do with the fact that there might be a issue with U.S. Treasuries, okay? Now, this is what she calls the elephant in the room. There is something known as rehypothecation, and it is the issue that a lot of people inevitably in the financial system tend to think that they own something that they don't. So a good analogy would be that, let's say, for example, you and I, for example, think we own one U.S. Treasury note, right? Maybe a 10-year note in this case that's earning a sense of interest. It just so happens that through rehypothecation, which I'll explain in a moment, you and I both happen to think we own that financial asset. And let's say in the real world, at the end of it all, you own that treasury, right? Because you decide to sell it on an open exchange before I do. And now I'm left with nothing. This is a symptom of rehypothecation, but what really leads to rehypothecation? What leads to this almost fantasy-like world where we can end up thinking we own the same asset? Well, it happens to usually come when people use these types of assets as collateral, right? So in many cases, people will, for example, mortgage their home in order to get some form of a loan or credit, whatever it may be. You put up some kind of collateral of some sort in order to obtain credit to some degree, your debt, in this case, money. And interestingly enough, there's a big issue with rehypothecation, and this happened back during the mid-2000s, in this case, or the early 2000s, when we had the housing crisis. A lot of people were going around asking different banks for new money with the same exact collateral. And this is a problem with our financial system. We don't have tracking mechanisms to make sure people don't, in a sense, double speak in this case. They don't actually go through and, use the same collateral twice. And the issue here is that it's not just in the housing market and probably equities, other markets. It's really bad when it comes to U.S. Treasuries. It is expected by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, that there are over 3 parties owning the same Treasury note. Meaning that if you want to view it in a game of musical chairs, 2/3 of existing treasuries in the world, or supposedly treasury wealth that people think they have, is not there at all. Now, if we're keeping in mind that idea of musical chairs and the idea that 1/3 of treasuries that people think they supposedly own actually exist, I think the first thing I'd want to do is go exchange it with the Fed and get my cash. I'd want to claim my payday and do it as quick as possible. And that's what she's talking about here, right? This is what Caitlin discusses in her article. And I really recommend you read through the whole thing. There's a lot of other kind of important substantive material. I don't have the time to dive through it today, guys. But I am going to be doing a much longer format video on this when I come back from Malta. And I think it's so important to understand this because it might seem a little bit confusing, but rehypothecation is actually relatively easy to understand, right? It's a symptom. It's a symptom of people over collateralizing, knowingly in most cases, over collateralizing themselves. Not over collateralizing, utilizing collateral multiple times over, and it can affect other people in this case who really, think that someone is either more sound in their money or inevitably ending up owning something that doesn't exist, right? It doesn't exist. There's not enough treasuries to satisfy the ownership that supposedly is believed in the financial system, right? I hope I'm making sense in this regard, guys. I don't mean to overcomplicate it, but Caitlin did a great job putting this together, as she's done in many things in crypto space. Great contributor. And again, if you guys want to check this out, you guys can read the article for yourself. It is a really good piece. I recommend it. Anyways, guys, let's go ahead and dive into the interview with Dan from Morpheus. Alrighty, everyone. So in today's sponsored interview, I'm going to be sitting down with a long-term friend of mine who I got the chance to meet back as far back as 2018. And that is Dan Weinberger, who is the co-founder and CEO of Morpheus Network. Dan, thank you for making time to come back here on the channel to talk about what you guys are doing. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Nick, for having me. Always a pleasure to be on the channel, and having a nice busy day, but always taking time for you, Nick, of course.
Yeah, we were joking and stuff beforehand. It's kind of like these chats are always good catch-ups on all the stuff you're doing behind the scenes. And, when we have these conversations, I'm always curious to see how you guys are developing because you're making big moves. One of the things that we talked about last time on the channel, I really want to spend some time discussing is what you're doing in the sense of the work you're doing with the DHS and how you're continuing to expand Morpheus Network into the supply chain system. But before we dive into that, a lot of people may not know what you guys do. So could you give a brief description as to what Morpheus Network is all about?
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, we're a supply chain automation platform. We're really supply chain middleware. So supply chain is obviously a massive industry. And what we do is connect all the disjointed parts of supply chain, whether it's a customs broker, a shipper, actual readings from IoT devices, all hashed together on a beautiful digital footprint to give a history to all these shipments and products. So you can always pull that up and have that on a distributed ledger and be able to see all the history of everything you've shipped off. So.
Awesome, and I think that's a great brief description. We've always talked here on the channel about how supply chain is one of my top 3 kind of use cases for blockchain technology and removing inefficiencies. If you've mentioned before, there's literally $1 trillion worth of inefficiencies in the supply chain system that blockchain could help solve. And I'm really curious, as we kind of hinted to at the beginning, we're talking about becoming an integral part inside the supply chain system. And you guys, instead of just going company to company, even though you have built some really interesting partnerships, you've actually been able to expand your technology to being utilized by the DHS in some shape or form. So I want to definitely get some clarity on what that partnership is looking like now, and then also how you guys have expanded since we last talked.
Yeah, we're lucky enough to be partnered with Customs Direct. They're a customs broker out of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and they've been a part of this working group called the Emerging Technologies Working Group, working alongside of COAC, which is a committee which is appointed by DHS, looking for different solutions for optimization, so on and so forth. So this POC in particular, which Customs Direct, has completed now with us, is basically to test the interoperability of blockchains, that are hashed to a blockchain basically. And it's been a success. We've had favorable results, obviously. Now we're waiting for the other working groups to finish off their POCs as well. Then we bring together all the data and all the information. And we're very excited to be, that technology on the back end of the interoperability POC test for intellectual property rights. So.
Awesome. That's incredible. I think it's awesome because, what you guys are doing is kind of leapfrogging, going company to company and actually focusing on just becoming an integral part within the actual supply chain system. And if this partnership or this, development continues to grow as it is, then you guys could become an integral part inside of the overall supply chain system for the United States, which would be huge for the imports and exports that come through.
Yeah, most definitely. It's always our view to go through, multipliers to get as many sort of people working with the platform and using the technology. So working with customs brokers and, receiving points and so on and so forth. That's been a great sort of target. And at the same time, it works really well, as you can see, for, different government bodies and so on and so forth. And we do have some other, projects on the go with other government bodies in different parts of the world as well. So.
That's awesome. I think it's important, yeah, definitely to focus on the overall global supply chain. But one thing as well that you guys had as of recent that you and I discussed, in this case, Dan, was that you guys got a recent new hire at the company, and this is going to help you guys expand out to a lot of different companies, build new partnerships, get people experimenting with the technology and seeing how they can remove inefficiencies. So you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, most definitely. We're very excited, about growth all the time, and we're excited to hire Benjamin Smith to join the business development team. Benjamin has an extensive personal network. He's already introduced us to a ton of companies. His network runs into a ton of different verticals. Right now in the food and beverage vertical, as well as the pharmaceutical vertical, we're running through actual workflows and processes with companies. We have documentation in front of us, as well as he's already introduced us to companies in the cannabis industry, as well as many other industries as well, oil and gas. He's connected as well through the mining industry as well. So we're very excited to have Benjamin on board. We're going to have our pipeline extremely full for a long time with all these different network connections, in addition to other projects we have on the go as well. So
yeah, I think what's so cool about you guys is you really streamline making sure that through Morpheus as a technology, you're keeping compliant with regulations when you're doing cross-border transactions of exports and imports. Not to mention as well, you mentioned not just food and beverage items, but you're also touching pharmaceuticals, potentially in the cannabis market, and the regulatory framework that's being put around those really is dependent on compliance, and then also making sure that you have the proper documentation, which again, you guys really streamline the whole process.
Most definitely. That's what we're good at. We're good at compliance, and we're good at visibility. Visibility keeps, geolocation, keeps track of your goods, but also the visibility of the temperature of the goods. With something like pharmaceuticals, where a single pallet could be worth $20 million, you don't want the temperature, getting out of range, ruining the entire shipment, and causing a huge backlog of medicine, basically. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's all kinds of different devices you guys can use to track, weather, humidity, temperature, things of that sort, as well as the location, which is really exciting. Outside of that as well, what are some examples right now that you guys can kind of showcase, Dan, that kind of showcase using Morpheus in real world examples? I think that's the one thing with most blockchain projects is we don't have the tangibility of it. So are there some good examples that we can maybe give to the audience and stuff to kind of get an understanding? Or
yeah, most definitely. Obviously, we mentioned, we touched on that DHS project, and that's more of a secure access sort of deal where people are uploading information to get through a border system. Mm-hmm. That not an average company would use that. Let's say like a hospital who has a secure parking lot or something like that could use a system like that. We have a ton of importers and exporters using the system as well. Various pilots all around the world. We actually done geolocating, using our QR code scanner and then bringing that back into the system to bring up the latitude and longitude in 6 continents now. We're running a pilot with shipping some goods from China with Gualin, which is a very high-end precision tool manufacturer. And at the same time, we talk about those different IoT devices. We're concentrating right now on geolocation as well as compliance documentation with them. By adding on something like a shock detector, so on and so forth for precision tools is essential. We're also having a pilot shipping from China, Nantong, a number 5 machine tool. They do bunch of drills and various machining devices. So excited to be working with a bunch of companies in China, as well as in the United States, obviously. Where I'm from Canada, so I've done a ton of work in the past within North America. So we have a ton of pilots going on with North American companies as well. We just announced Hoosier Feeder out of the States. They're doing an import using the platform as well, automating the entire process. So what's great about that is other companies see how we're completing these pilots, completing these different shipments, and see a parallel to what they need as well. And then they're reaching out to us and say, listen, we've been rejecting business, across the border or whatever it is, because we don't know how to handle it. It's not worth the headache of in the first place. But if it's as simple as an automated process, why not collect those extra funds? So it's really freeing up the world of global trade, right in front of our eyes, for certain companies, and very excited about that, of course.
Yeah, to touch on one thing, Dan, without diving too deep into it, I know on our channel we're kind of macro. I'm a macro trader myself, so I always talk about what's going on in the global supply chain as well in the economy. I think now we're kind of in a heightened kind of concerning time with all the tariffs going on and everything. I guess there's a general uncertainty which really incentivizes companies to look for ways to increase their margins or be able to compensate for those things. So I think you guys in that case providing that efficiency boost in the case of being able to reduce cost and be able to settle things much faster, as well as showcasing it through the real partners that you guys have, is almost like a compounding effect. I'm assuming you guys are just seeing growth beyond the board behind the scenes right now.
Yeah, we have to be picky with the projects that we, are working on based on the resources that we have, obviously. But what we're excited about is like you said, the margins, especially in those saturated markets. It's hard to tell a company, oh, we have to make more money, sell more goods if the market is saturated. But what you can do is optimize your actual processes, optimize your supply chain internally, and that's where your margins will increase. So.
Well, Dan, this is awesome, man. I'm glad to hear that you guys are expanding your business partnerships, that you're continuing to work with integrating your technology into integral parts of the regulatory framework through the DHS. And outside of that as well, covering a wide range of different countries as well, and showcasing that you can use this in a variety of different industries. But if people want to figure out a little bit more about what you're doing or maybe get engaged with the community in some way, where should they go to? We'll leave the links down below in the description as well for anything that you want to share.
Yeah, Nick, that's, it's easy for people to go onto our Telegram, the Morpheus Network Telegram. I always tell people, if they have a question for me directly, because they're hearing, the information come from me, they can email me directly as well, dan@morpheus.network. If you want to learn about what we're doing, go to our website as well. So once again, Nick, I can't thank you enough for having me on. I'm excited about the future for Morpheus, for the entire, sort of blockchain space as well. So,
well, Dan, I can tell you, I don't know many cryptocurrency projects where the CEO will happily give out their email and talk to the community directly. I think it speaks to not only the kindness of who you are as an individual, but also what you guys are doing and the seriousness of really wanting to build out partners. I know you've mentioned many times in the past that you always give credit to your community in the sense that they're always active, and a lot of them themselves have worked in the supply chain system, so they understand the inefficiencies and have played a big role in getting a lot of people to test out your product. So, Dan, as always, it's a pleasure, man. It's great to have you on, and we'll have to have you back on here onto the channel sometime soon in the future.
Nick, thank you so much. Pleasure's all mine, and I look forward to the next time for sure.